Mine.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Caitlin. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Newburyport City of Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals. Our agenda this evening is the agenda scheduled and published for April 11th, 2023. We begin at 7 p.m. It being now 7 p.m., we're going to start by introducing the board, doing a roll call, establishing the quorum, determining our 5 legal voting members, and then we will get into our public hearings, of which we have 1 continuance and 3 going forward. To begin with, allow me to just take a moment and introduce the members of the ZBA. My name is Rob Champetti. I'm the chairman. To my left is Mr. Ken Swanton, our vice chair. To his left, Mr. Walter Bud Shannon, member. To his left, Mr. Gregory Bennett, member. We have to my immediate right, Ms. Patricia Pecknick, associate member. And introducing others in the room for the record, we have Ms. Gretchen Joy, who is our keeper of the minutes and our note taker. Caitlin Sullivan is our city planner, and Mr. Andy Port, our planning director. Also online, we have our associate member, Lynn Scow. And I don't know if Lynn is
not here yet. Not yet.
Lynn will be joining us, and when she does, we'll establish her attendance. And I believe that as we get started if she's not online by the time we begin our first public hearing, Lynn is designated to be the voting alternate or associate member. Will switch, and Ms. Packnick will be our voting associate member until Ms. Scow logs in. So with that, I'm going to just call the roll. We'll establish a attendance with either here or I, and we'll get started. Mr. Stephen Delisle, our secretary, is absent this evening. So Mr. Ken Swanton here, Mr. Walter Bud Shannon here, Mr. Gregory Bennett here, Ms. Patricia Pecknick
Here.
Ms. Lynn Scow is not yet on, and of course, Mr. Delisle is reported that he would be absent this evening. Rob Champetti, I'm here. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members present. She's here, and Lynn Scow. Actually, Lynn, we're just taking rolls, so perfect timing. Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Record that you are here as well. And Ms. Pecknick was our voting associate last meeting cycle. You'll be our voting associate this evening, if that works. So our 5 voting members this evening are myself, Mr. Swanton, Mr. Shannon, Mr. Bennett, and Ms. Scow. So having established a quorum, our roll call, introduced the board, and designated our 5 voting members, I'll get into our public hearings this evening. We do have one matter which we have received a request for continuance. It's the matter of Travis and Sarah Summer, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. Property address 69 High Street. This is a special permit for non-conformities. Attorney Mead, do you wish to be heard, or shall we take up the continuance and the requested date?
I would just like a continuance, and we're asking for May 9th, not your next meeting, because I have a conflict, so May 9th, please.
Very good. Members of the ZBA, we have a motion to continue the application on 69 High Street at the applicant's council's request to May 9th.
So moved.
Second. The motion is made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Shannon. Calling the roll on the motion to continue to May 9th. Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Ms. Scow.
Yes,
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 6 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Matter on 69 High Street is continued. So the first application in our public hearing this evening is the application for 13 Roosevelt Place. This is the application of Eric and Aaron Rapp, trustees of the W. Eric Rapp Living Trust, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. The property address again, 13 Roosevelt Place. It is an application for a special permit for nonconformities. The applicant seeks all necessary permits and permissions and applications to construct a 2nd-story addition above the single-story portion of an existing single-family structure that extends upward, a non-conforming rear yard setback. Attorney Mead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street, Newburyport. With me this evening is John Sava, who is the architect on the project, and Eric Rapp, who is one of the owners of the home at 13 Roosevelt Place. I'll give it the next slide, please. So Eric and Aaron are proposing to construct an addition over their existing garage to the rear and side of their home. The property is located in the R2 zoning district under the Newburyport ordinance and was constructed around 1952. 13 Roosevelt is actually at the corner of Ferry Road and Roosevelt Place, and therefore it has two front yards. Mr. Swanton's favorite thing. So we have the primary front yard, which is Ferry Road, and the secondary front yard, which is Roosevelt Place. It has an existing non-conformity for the primary front yard setback of 21.1, where 25 is required, and the rear yard setback of 9.9, where 25 is also required. When the house was built, that would have been a side yard at 10 feet. The property otherwise conforms to all other dimensional requirements of the ordinance. And so the setback affected is going to be the rear yard setback, which is where the garage is located. We'll show you that in a minute, which is opposite of Ferry Road, and will be impacted by an upward extension by the construction of a second floor over the garage. There are no changes to the existing footprint of the structure, and therefore are there no other impacts on the nonconformities. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here's the site plan. Ferry Road is to the right on this plan, and Roosevelt Place is at the bottom. And the garage is in the back off the end of the driveway, and where you can see proposed second floor. And that little area right there is the area to which Eric and Aaron are proposing to add a second floor addition. Next slide, please. So here are the existing elevations. We understand that the drawings that were submitted as part of the application were difficult to read, so John has worked to make these more legible. So in the top left, the existing elevations, you see the rear, which is the garage in the back, and then that's the opposite of Ferry Road. On the right-hand side, you see the secondary front yard setback, Roosevelt Place, so you can see the entrance to the garage there. And then on the bottom left is the primary front yard. So that's what you see off of Ferry Road, except for there's a pretty large fence along Ferry Road. You can't really see that very well. And then the side yard, which is the one that's opposite of Roosevelt Place, you see, and then you can see on the back right-hand side, you can see where the addition's going to go. Next slide, please. Here, we think that John's made this a little more legible. So you see the proposed elevation in the rear at the top left-hand corner. So you can see what that second floor addition looks like. It's slightly shorter than the existing roof, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the secondary front yard setback on the right. So that's if you were coming down Roosevelt Place and literally turning your head and looking in, because it is set back pretty far at the end of the driveway, but that's what that addition would look like. And then the bottom left, you can see that the front yard view doesn't change at all. And then the side yard opposite Roosevelt Place in the bottom right, you can see the addition again over the existing garage in that back portion of the structure. Next slide. And so here here are the line drawings with a little bit darkened area, so you can see again, but the elevations I think were clear in this particular instance. And then if you go to the next slide, please. So here's a view. If you pass the driveway and look back at the house, that's the garage and the area that's going to have the addition on. And next slide, please. And here's a view of the driveway at the corner of the drive in Roosevelt Place, stepped into the ground a little bit there. And then here is a view from the corner of Roosevelt Place and Ferry Road. Next slide, please. And again, this is a view from Ferry Road. Next slide, please. And this is head on Ferry Road. So the addition obviously is in the back. You can kind of see the driveway in the left-hand side of this photograph. Next slide, please. And then this is coming down Ferry Road. And so you can see the back area of the house there, which you can kind of see, get a view of where the addition's going to go. Next slide. So the criteria, as you know, for under section 9, for modification to pre-existing non-conforming single-family home is the first is whether or not there's a new non-conformity created. And in this instance, there are no additions of any new non-conformities. The rear yard setback will be exacerbated by an upward extension, but there are no new nonconformities. The next finding the board can make is that the proposed change will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure. Here, the proposed addition is entirely over the existing structure and doesn't expand the footprint. The front portion of the existing home seen from Fort Ferry Road has 2 stories, and the rear portion behind it will have 1, and now they will be consistent and cohesive. The 2-story portion, as I mentioned earlier, has a 19.75 foot height, and the addition is going to have a 19.5 foot height, well below, of course, the 35 foot maximum building height. Architecturally speaking, the addition helps to better connect the rear 1-story portion of the house with the rest of the structure. And if you look around the community, which we're going to look a little bit more on the mind maps, there's an eclectic mix of homes in this area. Many of them have been added to and enlarged over the last number of years, but it's certainly not out of characteristic, not dramatically or inappropriate at all in the context of the neighborhood. We have 1-story, 1.5-story, 2-story homes on nearby Ferry Road and Roosevelt Place. Many of the homes were built around the same time, 40s and 50s. So they're all about the same time period. And we're going to be adding approximately 539 square feet to a home that is currently 1,924 square feet. So it's going to be just under 2,500 square feet or thereabouts. So if you take that all into consideration, we don't think it's going to be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood at all. If you go to the next slide, please. So here's the corner lot. This is the My Maps view, of course. Obviously, it's one of the larger lots in the area. Notwithstanding that, there's no change to the footprint on this home, merely going up. You can see the house to the right has a greater height. Similarly, the house behind it has a pretty significant height on it. So it's certainly not going to be as large as any of those houses. And as you can see down Roosevelt Place, that home at the corner of Roosevelt and Truman is pretty good size as well. Next slide, please. Is that it? Okay. So we did provide a letter of support to the neighbor in the rear next to Eric and Aaron on Roosevelt Place, and he is in support of the project. He would be the most impacted by this change. He did provide a letter of support, which we submitted today, I think. And with all of that, we would request the board find that the proposed addition to this home is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing non-conforming structure. And we'd request your consideration. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Attorney Mead. And with that, we'll close that portion of the public hearing and go to public comment. For anyone who is attending online, if you're unfamiliar with public comment, and I'll ask Ms. Sullivan to just put the public comment slide up. We ask that anyone who wishes to speak, we'll start with in the room by a show of hands. I'll recognize you. We'll ask that you kindly give your name and address for Ms. Joy, our note taker. We'll go through all raised hands. Do not feel as though you need to speak in support of or opposition to an application. If you wish to, you may, of course, but there is no pro or con column. Just simply raise your hand, be recognized, and speak your mind. We certainly want to hear from you. Sure. We do ask that everyone kindly govern yourself within 2 minutes or so, within reason, just so that everyone has an opportunity. And then once we go through the room, I'll go to anyone who wishes to raise a virtual hand online. I see that we have 9 attendees that are via Zoom. So if you are logged in via Zoom and you wish to speak or be heard from in connection with any application, including this one, starting with this one, just simply raise your hand. We'll unmute your mic. We'll ask you to do the same, and then just give your name and address for our note taker and speak your mind. So with that, anyone in the room wish to be heard in connection with the application? Anyone going once, going twice? Okay. Seeing no hands, I'll go to the virtual room, and anyone wish to be heard in connection with the application for 13 Roosevelt Place. Again, seeing no hands, I will close that portion of the public hearing, and we will now move into questions from the board. We'll begin with Mr. Swan.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned during your presentation that you had submitted these things, the proposed elevations, the more legible ones. And I want to thank you for that, because when I first looked at this a week ago, I honestly had a very hard time following the drawings. And these are vastly improved. I know they came in Friday afternoon, kind of late in the process after the staff report went out, but they're much improved. I have a much better sense of what's going on. I've been by the property. This really helped. I just want to emphasize that if when I finally saw the plan, I could figure it out. If it was kind of controversial in my mind, I might have objected to how late they came in, because this is a process where butters can go online and look. And, to finally see plans that you can really follow Friday afternoon before the hearing is starting there. In that case, we could even take the step of continuing the hearing, not even hearing it, in order to give everybody a chance to see it. In this case, I don't really have any, I don't even have any questions. I think it's very clear what I now see. But I just want to point out that thank you for getting them in. I just wish it was earlier, and if it was more controversial, it'd be much more concern for me. And not even wanting to hear it tonight. So anyway, with that, I will yield my time. Because I have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Questions, Mr. Chen, any questions?
Just a couple. Do you know what the square footage is before and after the addition?
Yeah, so it is 1,924 now, and we're adding 539 square feet. So
Almost 25.
yeah, that's right, I said earlier, but I'm not a mathematician, but I'm gonna say about 25.
2463.
2463 according
You're
to
an
that.
excellent mathematician. You've always got the numbers right.
Yeah, right.
I saw that you had one letter of support from 11 Roosevelt, which is the next house down. Do you know if there was any discussion with the people either side of it that will also see the tall rear end of the building? So that'd be 38 Ferry and 42 Ferry? 38 Ferry is been in Florida. We have been, and I guess we'll be across the street. Across the street would be 18 Roosevelt or 18 Roosevelt. He didn't sign anything, but he's happy to. We didn't think he was going to. Okay, but you haven't heard any
No.
negatives. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chen and Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, perhaps this is better addressed to the architect.
Right, here's John.
I'm sorry. I didn't see you there. Can you just tell me how the addition is integrated into the existing structure from the perspective of materials and windows and other architectural aspects, if you can?
Sure. If you want to see the plan, to see how it joins, we have that on one of the slides. I think which one is that?
I think what he's talking about is materials. He's talking about the exterior
I thought also
Right,
the connect-
materials. and
No,
windows.
not this building details.
Yeah,
My best tool in my toolbox is my cell phone, so I just.
okay.
Materials, what kind of size?
Yeah, it will not be a foreign element going on to the addition.
Let me be more direct.
Try to blend as best we can.
Gotcha. Are you going to reclad the existing structure?
I don't think there was any intent that we're going to be recladding.
So you're gonna match the clad?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see.
What is the current siding
Cedar shape.
Cedar shakes.
and what is the plan?
There'll be cedar shakes.
Okay. And can you comment on the windows, the new windows, and also the existing windows and how they?
Sure, the existing windows are box framed, with a typically a frame going around the actual window. I think it's a 3.5 inch trim.
What kind of window is it?
Well, it'll be a true divided light pellet
Okay.
or comparable, maybe an Anderson divided light.
Those are the new windows you're talking about,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
And how do they, well, I'm just curious, how do they compare and contrast?
Are the lights gonna match the lights are they gonna be 1:1?
1:1. Well, always the question here, isn't it? They'll be matching what's happening in the rest of the house. The connecting link, has a higher band of windows. And as there also are in the master bedroom, which is the bed is going underneath it. So they're obviously not going to be double hung windows. They'll end up being awning windows. But they'll, that type of connector, you see a lot in older houses, a higher band of windows. The roof will match the existing asphalt roof. We have to extend the chimney 2 feet above the highest ridge by code. Yeah, I don't, the only bit of, there's a protected area over the garage, which has a metal roof on it to get rid of the snow in that area, but it's, just an attempt at, modernizing it just a tad.
Gotcha. Has this home been added to previously?
Yeah.
It does look a little.
Yeah. Can't be responsible.
I understand.
Yeah, I think.
I think that makes, what I'm reacting to is the fact that it is somewhat of like, it's been
Yeah, it should,
worked upon, and now we're trying to do it again, and how to make that cohere is an architectural challenge.
Yeah.
So those were my kind of where I was going with my questions. But that's all I had.
Okay, that's enough, yeah.
Are you sure?
I think so,
Okay.
for me, but just one side note, the lower right-hand elevation. Which one is that? Is that the south?
Side yard.
Yeah, you even driving up Ferry Road. You're not gonna see that very much. That's way off in the corner. Not that I'm not afraid to have people look at it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Scow, any questions?
Yes, thank you. I appreciated the aerial view of the subject property on its lot. I'm wondering if there are any views of the neighboring properties and where improvements have been done. I find it very helpful when you typically provide those to see that it's, going to the second prong, that it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood.
So if you could go to the My Maps again, and I apologize, Ms. Scow, we don't actually have neighborhood pictures with this. I should have. You can see the house right next door. It's been recently renovated on Roosevelt Place. And it's a 2.5-story house. The house down in the corner of Truman and Roosevelt, the next one down, similarly has been recently renovated, also more than 2 stories. The house directly across the street is probably just a standard 2-story house. Not a lot of recent work on it. And then the house 2 doors down from that, you can see also the next 2, it would be the 3rd and 4th house down on Roosevelt Place, have similarly all been renovated in more recent years.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, Ms. Pecknick.
Asked and answered.
All right, thank you. I'll say the same. I don't have any other questions myself either that haven't already been addressed. So thank you, members of the ZBA, for the questions, and Attorney Mead for the answers. Closing that portion of the public hearing, we'll now go into deliberations. And again, this application, since it's a special permit for nonconformities, we have a 2-prong analysis under section 9. And I'll ask the members of the ZBA in our deliberations to just tailor your deliberations around those 2 prongs under 9B. So we'll start with Mr. Swan.
Yeah, well, on the first prong, there are no new nonconformities. So that gets us to the second prong, which is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, which is than was already there. My perspective on this is that it's well set back from the road, from Roosevelt, where you most see it from. It's Mr. Shagan got into the amount of massing, the percentage of massing increase. I didn't think that was excessive for the neighborhood, because as was pointed out on this page, there's quite a few houses that have had additions. But I don't think this house is out of line with the neighborhood. And I also think it's significant that the most affected, if you walk by this house, the most affected abutter is the one just above there on Roosevelt, and they came in with being okay with this. So to me, all of these add up to, I do not think it's substantially more detrimental than the neighborhood was already there, and I can support this application.
Okay, and Mr. Chen.
I agree with the 2-prong evaluation, and I think it is, I was gonna say a modest, addition. A 1,900 square foot house in that neighborhood is probably, almost small to medium, and 2,500 square feet is not gigantic. I do think it does add some mass to it. There are other houses in the neighborhood when you drive around that are similar in size, extensions off the back end of the building. So I can support it. I don't think it's more detrimental to the neighborhood.
Okay, Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I concur with my colleagues. I think it's always difficult to take the third bite of the apple here. On structure that's been identified many times, but I find that the two criteria have been met, and the scale and the massing does not trouble me either based upon the lot itself or the houses in the neighborhood. So for those reasons, I can approve this out.
Okay, and Ms. Scott.
I would agree with the sentiments already expressed by my colleagues, and for those reasons, I would support this application.
Okay, Ms. Peckett.
I have nothing to add.
Okay, I agree, and forgive me, I mentioned two prongs, and for anyone that has no idea what a prong is or what we're talking about. It occurred to me that I probably should have defined the terms before we went and talked about them, but for those that are familiar, please indulge us and forgive us. For those that aren't, when we analyze during deliberations, as members of the ZBA, it's special permit for nonconformities. The board, as you may have heard, has to toil with two evaluations. The first of which, or the first prong of which, is to determine whether or not the board finds that the application is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use or structure. And when making that evaluation, the board can consider factors such as size, scale, massing, volume, and location of the proposed structure, the extension, the alteration as compared to the existing structure and or the lot. The second prong, the second test that the board must find is to determine whether or not there is an intensification or an exacerbation of the existing nonconformity. So those are the two prongs, those are the two tests that we have to, as a board, run our thinking through. And so as you heard members of the ZBA go through that analysis and refer to prongs, taking my lead on that perhaps, those are the prongs that we're referring to. So with that, I just want to make that note for the record. And also point out that it seems that the application does trigger the street and sidewalk ordinance. So according to our staff report, it seems that we haven't heard anything yet back from DPS on recommendations. Do we know anything further?
Yeah.
One new tree.
Just one new tree?
One tree.
Okay, and I assume that is part of the applicant's proposal. So I'll address that when we get into the next section. If there are no further deliberations, I'll close this portion of the public hearing. I'll ask a member of the ZBA to propose a motion, and in doing so, please take a moment to condition the addition of a sidewalk tree as per DPS's requirements. So with that, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 13 Roosevelt Place, ZNC 23-6, and to include the DPS recommendation of a single tree for the siding.
I'll second it.
Very good. Motion is made by Mr. Shannon and seconded by Mr. Swanton. Calling the roll, Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon. Yes. Mr. Peckman. I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett.
Yeah.
Ms. Scott.
Yes,
And Penny, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries and the application is approved. Thank you, Attorney Mead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck.
All right, Carolyn, can I have a moment?
Yes, of course. We're gonna take a quick, anyone else wanna get a drink of water or take a momentary pause? We'll just take a quick pause in the agenda for, a few moments for anybody who wants to step out there. Then we'll jump right back in with 4 Jackson Street. It was, Mr. Bennett is back. Who is Mr. Peckman?
No, it's
Alone.
They'll tell you where.
The spelling of your name is better for you.
Yes.
And you can do it after.
And they're.
Take care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put it in higher.
Getting back on the record, we'll pick back up with our second public hearing. This is the application of Sarah and William Jor, care of Lisa Mead Tellerman and Costa LLC. The applicant's address is 4 Jackson Street. The applicant seeks all necessary permits, permissions, and approvals for a special permit for nonconformities to remove an existing open deck and construct a 2-story addition in the same footprint, extending laterally and upward non-conforming left side and rear setbacks and increasing non-conforming lot coverage. Attorney Mead.
Thank you very much. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport, on behalf of Sarah and William Jor. And with me this evening is John Sava, who is the architect on this project as well. As the chair indicated, this is for a project at 4 Jackson Street, which is a pre-existing non-conforming structure. Let me go to the first one. So the property is located in the R2 and the COD zoning districts. It's an improved with a 1-family residence that was constructed around 1850 according to the assessor's records and 1875 according to the district data sheets. It's been modified on numerous occasions, as you will see shortly in the photographs. The property has the following non-conformities. Might be easier to list the conformities. Lot area of 2,219 where 10,000 is required. Frontage of 47.5 feet where 90 feet is required. Front yard setback of 10.1 where 25 feet is required. Left side yard setback of 0.1 feet where 10 feet is required. Rear yard setback of 0.1 feet where 25 feet is required. And lot coverage of 31.1% where 25% is the maximum. It does have a conforming right yard setback and open space building height and parking. Currently, there's a rear elevated deck attached to the structure. And since the deck is over 30 inches in height, it does count towards the rear yard setback. You can go to the next slide, please. So the proposal from the Jors is to remove the rear deck and construct a 2-story addition in a slightly smaller footprint where that rear deck is. The proposal is to push the addition 6 inches in on either side, which would actually improve the side setback and rear setback of the existing. So where the deck is 26 by 9.5, the proposed addition will be 25 by 9.5. The living area will be under, the added living area will be under 500 square feet at 475. The current structure has 1,304 square feet. It is small for a family of 4. The proposed addition does not trigger the DCOD for the project. Next slide, please. So here is the site plan. This is 4 Jackson's Street, and you can see in the orangish color, brownish color in the back where the proposed addition is to go, which obviously is at the rear of the house. And you can see slightly on these drawings where it's pushed in on either side of the, I would call it the original structure, but it's certainly not the original structure, but of the existing structure. Next slide, please. So here are the existing elevations. So you have the rear elevation, which already obviously at some point had an addition put off to the left, and the front elevation, which will not change, by the way, the front elevation will not change. Next slide, please. And so here's the proposed rear addition, which looks similar, of course, to the existing, because all it is doing is mirroring it and bringing it out a little bit further. And then, of course, the front elevation doesn't change. Next slide, please. Here we have the existing side elevations, the existing left side, and the existing right side elevation. And then you can see the deck on both of these drawings. Next slide, please. And now you have the proposed left side elevation and the proposed right side elevation. Next slide, please. So here are photographs of the house. So this is if you're going east on Jackson Street, you can see the existing dormer and the existing house there. Next slide, please. And here's looking down the driveway of the neighbor's house, and the addition will go to the rear of this. Next slide. Here's the front elevation, a little closer up. And of course, that's not going to be impacted. Next slide, please. And here is the side elevation if you were traveling west on Jackson. Again, you're probably not going to really be able to see the addition from this angle. You would be if you're walking down Jackson, because it would be where the deck is in the back, and you can see the railings of the deck. Next slide, please. Again, here's at the end of the driveway. We wanted to get in there so you could see where the actual addition is going to go. And so with that, the criteria for a special permit for nonconformities is whether or not there's any new nonconformity created. And here there are no new nonconformities being created. There is an upward extension of the rear and side yard setback nonconformity, and there is an intensification of the lot coverage calculation. The reason that is because the deck, while it counts for setbacks, doesn't count for lot coverage. And now we're putting a structure on the deck, and so it will count against lot coverage. The next criteria is whether or not the proposed change will be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. And here, the proposal is essentially a reuse of the existing deck into living space with a slightly larger setback, as I noted before. To help distinguish it architecturally, John has designed it so it presses in 6 inches from either side of the walls of the house. It will be minimally visible from the street, if at all, and have little to no impact on the surrounding neighborhood. The neighbor to the rear would be the most impacted and has provided a letter of support, as has, I would add, all of the other direct abutters to the project. The home has previously been significantly altered, and the addition on the rear will certainly not be substantially more detrimental than the existing structure from that point of view. The new home will be just over 1,770 square feet in living area. And while, as I said earlier, it is a small addition by square footage, the added space will have a significant impact on the quality of life of the Jor family. The Jors are trying to add as much space as possible. They have a young teen who is differently abled and who is in a home-based program and has various caregivers coming in and out at all times of the day. The additional space to the rear is to the rear and a continuation of the existing roof line over an existing deck and with the existing sidewalls of the home. There's no intrusion onto the public way, nor is the addition viewable from the public way by and large. Given the benefits that it will provide to the family, the support of the neighbors, and the limited impact on the public way, or frankly, the area generally, we believe the board can find that this proposal is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. And just let's look at the neighborhood. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So here is the My Maps view. We're going to show you the next one, but this is an easier view of this. So you can see the property highlighted in the yellow, and then the surrounding area as well. It's not significantly larger by any extent than the surrounding houses. There is a small house right next to it, but the addition isn't going to be dramatically bigger than anything else around it. Next slide, please. And here we just did the one that's a GIS view, so you can see the vegetation around it. It gives a better context, we think, of the property. Next slide, please. So here's a view down Jackson Street. And you get an idea of what the streetscape is with our nice new sidewalk there, by the way. Next slide, please. And this is across the street. Again, you get a view of what the various configurations of houses are in the area. Again, all modest size houses. This certainly is not going to be bigger than most of these. Next slide, please. Again, there's 2-family across the street. Lots of eclectic additions in various areas on Jackson Street. Next slide, please. Is that it? Okay. With that, we would remind the board again, we provided letters of support then from the immediate surrounding neighbors. And we would appreciate the board's consideration to finding that this is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the existing structure.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead, and Mr. Staha for the presentation. I'll close that portion of the public hearing. And we'll again put up the public comment slide. If there is anyone in the physical audience who wishes to speak, just kindly raise your hand and allow me to recognize you. We'll ask you to give your name and address for the record, and you will be heard. Seeing no hands, going once, going twice. I'm going to switch over to the online room. If anyone wishes to be heard, just kindly raise your hand virtually, and we will recognize you. And of course, we'll ask you to unmute your mic and do the same, kind of the same protocol, you know, just give your name and address for our keeper of the records and speak your mind. Anyone wish to speak? Seeing no hands, we'll close that portion of the public hearing. And we'll go right into questions from the board, beginning with Mr. Swan.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if you could put up the zoning matrix, because I just had a question on the zoning matrix. Yeah, there it is, just blow it up. Blow it up a little further. So. Corner lots, as you indicated, are always a little mystifying, but the side setback L, I assume that. Actually, this is not a corner lot, sorry, yeah, confusing the last.
Right,
Side setback L, that's on the left, so the rear setback. Where's the one that's, there is rear setback, should be 25 feet. You're saying it's existing is 0.1 feet,
that's right.
and that, is that to the deck? I'm sorry, to the deck,
Yes, sir.
and it's 0.8 feet, and that's to the addition.
Correct.
How far is it today from the setback to the house?
I don't know the answer to that, because that's not how the dimensional requirements are
So I
met.
realize the setback requirements look at that, but we have to consider massing and other aspects. I'm just trying to get a sense. If you go to the site plan, I couldn't find it in the site plan. How far is this house? They blow up the back there.
Right,
How far is this house? I guess somewhere. I think-
so we,
Same.
yeah, we can show you there, so. The addition is, how wide is the
9.5?
addition? 9.5 feet?
It's going out 9.5.
9.5 feet, so it's a little, so right now, the house is what, 10 feet from the rear yard?
9.5 plus the 0.8 feet. so
Yeah.
A little over 10 feet.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. I was trying to understand that.
Okay.
The thing I appreciate knowing of the site plan is. I do like the fact you stepped it on the sides. You indicated that, but it doesn't say how much was stepped in. Do you know how much is that?
It's
stepped
definitely
in?
drawing.
Yes, it does, it's a 0.5 stepped in, it's 0.6.
I'm sorry,
0.6.
0.5 to 6
Point-
inches.
6 inches, it's 0.5, a half a foot, 6 inches.
On either side?
Yes, sir,
Does it say that there or that's, I couldn't find
it's
it.
on, it's
It says
on,
on the left
There's a
hand.
0.6 on the left
That
side,
0.6 refers to the step in
right?
on one of the sides. Okay, and it's the same on the other.
yes, sir,
Okay. The and then I think you already said this, but not to belabor it, but the houses on this site plan. To the right of 2 Jackson, to the left of whatever that one is, and behind it, all 3 of those folks have indicated letters of support.
yes.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman.
Just. For the heck of it, what will be in the new addition? What's,
On the first floor, right now, there's a kitchen and a small breakfast area adjacent to it. Very small.
so that's what will be on the
Push it,
first floor, when you
yeah.
push out?
That we're gonna push that out, and where there's a wall right now, where the kitchen sink is, we're gonna make that a little larger. There'll be an area that'll blend in to that new room, which they desperately need. In the upstairs, we're just increasing the size of the bedrooms, and we're not adding enough bathroom.
So two of the existing bedrooms will be larger.
Correct,
9.5 feet.
correct. More closet space, etc.
Okay. I noticed on one of the drawings that showed the new roof line, it looks like on one side, there's a step in the roof. I think it was the right side, so the roofs don't match, and the other side, they did match.
Yeah, they never did, so. The original house had one dormer that was down, sort of the correct distance from the
Yeah.
ridge. And the other side went right up to the ridge.
See if I can find the drawing.
There's the elevations there.
We just followed that through.
How about, I guess it's the drawing 7. Can you go to 7? Oh, maybe it's the next one. Yeah, so that's with the addition on. Are both of the new roofs, the entire length of the building, one contiguous roof, or is it like, if you look at the right side elevation, it almost looks like there's a step.
No, that's just
It's just
dimension
the
line,
dimensional line.
but when you
Okay.
step the building back in plan,
Yeah,
you end up with a higher ridge, facial line.
facial line, yeah, on both sides, okay.
Yeah.
The other thing, just to, I guess, reiterate the existing lot coverage is 31 and we wind up at 42, so we're increasing 11%. That sound right?
That's,
I think it's on.
42, yes, it is 31-1 to 42-1.
42, okay.
That's correct.
So it's. Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Very good. Mr. Bennett.
No questions, my colleagues.
Thank you. Ms. Scott.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Ms. Peckney.
Yeah, since Mr. Swanton mentioned his concerns on the timeline on the last application, and Ms. Cal asked about the required neighborhood context photos. Yeah, I'm asking on this application, but in general, on many other applications coming in, what happened to providing demo plans? Well, the application says attached elevation plans showing any proposed demolition, alteration, or new construction. So we're often not seeing demo plans, and it's important information. I trust that it's under 25% and that we might not get the demo calcs, but I just want to certify to myself that I read it on paper.
Sure.
And I know there are things on the agenda coming up in the next couple of agendas that don't have demo plans, and I think if I was in a butter, I would want to know that this board had all the information that needed. So I'm sort of asking my fellow board members to insist on the demo plans as required.
Yeah, so we can, if I could, Mr. Chair and Ms. Peckman, we're happy to give those to you. So they get submitted to Jennifer because she's the one that makes that determination. Happy to carry it through. I mean, you have,
Yeah.
it's all in on whatever the online system is. It's all in there. So we're happy then to put it again in our filing because she
Yeah,
has
I
to make
appreciate
that,
it.
yeah, she has to make that call, right? That's who makes the call. We don't make the call. We give her the plans and she reviews them and says yes or no or whatever. So we're happy to include them with the ZBA filing, so it's not a problem.
Okay, great.
And we'll update. I know we have another one coming up that we have a continuance.
Yeah,
We'll throw that in for those. That's fine.
okay, I was
Yeah.
looking at that as well.
Yeah, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Very good. I have no further questions that haven't already been addressed, so I can close that portion of the public hearing. And we will go now into deliberations. And again, members of the ZBA in deliberating, because this is an application for a special permit for nonconformities, we will again revisit the famed prongs. And we have 2 prongs of our analysis. I'll ask everyone to kindly just govern your deliberations around the 2 criteria that we as a ZBA need to find. One is to grant, in order to grant the special permit for nonconformities, of course, our board must find that there will be no addition of a new nonconformity. And the second task, the second prong, is that in addition to that, we as a board must also find that the application will not be substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than the pre-existing non-conforming use or structure. And of course, we can use any of the following in making that findings, factors such as size, scale, massing, volume, and the location of the proposed structure as compared to the existing structure or the lot in the neighborhood and reasonable alternatives to the proposal. Also, I'm just going to note that the DPS recommendation, this application does appear to trigger the street tree and sidewalk ordinance. So DPS has made a one tree in front of the home recommendation from the list of recommended street trees. The sidewalk they determined is in good, if not excellent condition, so no work is recommended or needed. So with that, let's begin deliberations and we'll start with Mr. Swan.
Well, starting out with prong number one, are there any new nonconformities? No, there aren't. So we'll get to prong number two, is it substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than what's already there in its non-conforming state? As I look at this, first of all, there are a couple of intensifications. We're intensifying the lot coverage, as was pointed out by my colleague. We're intensifying the height of the back there, where it's close to the property line. On the other hand, it is on the back of the lot, and as you walk down the street, it's almost hard to see it. It's also to appreciate it being set in on both sides a little bit, that helps make it feel less massive. There's only 3 people that really see it really well, and you have letters of support from all 3 of them. So having said all that, I do not find it more detrimental, substantially more detrimental than what's already there, and I can support this proposal.
Very good. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, it's a cute house when you drive by, it's nice to come home. I do agree it'd be difficult to see this addition, it's so small, 9 feet is 9.5 feet, whatever it is, it's so small. My biggest concern was the lot coverage, it's a big jump. But with that said, the letters of support way heavier for me than the massing, if you will, the additional lot coverage. So with that said, with the one tree on the sidewalk, I can support it.
Very good. Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, I reached the same conclusion. There is no new nonconformity, but that's not particularly compelling here since there are so many nonconformities on this parcel. So I don't really
Find a new one.
yeah, hard find. But I guess when I look at this, I mean, I think if the second prong, as we want to describe it today, really has 2 prongs in and of itself. One is whether the size, scale, and massing is substantially detrimental to the existing lot and structure and to the neighborhood. Now, the first of that articulated prong, I find this at the outer boundary of any finding that it is not. And in the absence of the letters of support, I would be really scratching my head on this, but I am moved significantly by the fact that there is such strong support. And I will also say, as to the neighborhood, I think it fits fine in the neighborhood. The neighborhood's somewhat compact. It doesn't feel like it would be out of character, but it does stretch the boundary on that lot itself. But nevertheless, because the 3, as Mr. Swan indicated, the 3 primary neighbors have supported this, I will indeed support it, and I am for those reasons.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Scow.
I would echo the comments of my colleagues. I had a hard time with this, given the small lot size and the additional mass that was added on, but I did find the letters from the abutters quite persuasive, given they live in the neighborhood. So I would be inclined to support it, given those letters.
Thank you. And Ms. Pecknick.
I have another processing concern. It's not addressed to the applicant, but I just want it in the record. This comes directly here because the addition was, it's not a roof line change because it's adjacent to an extensive roof line. Mr. Shaggy mentioned the continuation of the roof. So an extension of roof line, it's not a demolition, but it is an alteration of the roof line. And the roof line review that would have been done at the historical commission is premised on the idea that the city wants to preserve the shape and form and dimension of the roof, and the extension doesn't do that. I'm not even supposing that the historical commission would have objected to this, wouldn't have approved the alteration. They might have said, drop it down in the back. There is a lower grade going down the hill. They would have said it's in the rear. But on principle, I object to not having had the historical commission look at it first. I just want that in the record.
Very good. I'll just chime in and add to my colleagues with respect, of course, to my dissenting colleague, to the colleagues that seem to be sort of evenly minded in the majority on supporting the application. I shared many of those sentiments about the many nonconformities, but no new nonconformities. That doesn't, while it might be unique in that statement, it's very ordinary in the context of the neighborhood. Many neighborhoods throughout Newburyport are just like this, are irregular in this regular way, so to speak. And I think that in this instance, it's a very small footprint. It's an adaptive and creative alteration to create an improvement and longevity and lifestyle and family style, and that live style, use style of how the built environment should sort of track life and and habit and sort of how we use these spaces. I think it's important to realize that our city is what it is. The spaces and places are what they are. They're very tight and small. Yet our families grow, our needs grow. Families need to age in place in some instances. There's other instances where we need to extend and prolong, care and accommodation for other family members. And I think that we are wise as a board to be thoughtful in our review of the criteria to think about those things as well. It sounds like most everyone, in fact, everyone here is. So I too support it, and I just want to commend the applicant's architect and Attorney Mead just for sort of taking that thoughtful approach. It's not just coming in looking to blow out roofs and add dormers and do things that give a lot of put a lot of extra work. If we weren't so handsomely compensated here at the zoning board of appeals, it would be hard to do. But it is it's good to see thoughtful work, and I appreciate that. So with that, I don't have anything further to add. Was there anything else anyone else wanted to add? I think anything else? Okay. With that, I'll close that portion of the public hearing, and I will entertain a motion. And again, in any motion, try to also carve in the street tree piece.
I'd be happy to make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve the special permit for nonconformities for 4 Jackson Street, which is number 23-7, with a special condition that the applicant shall install 1 street tree as noted.
Okay.
I'll second.
From the list of recommended street.
From the list of recommended street.
All right, motion's made by Mr. Swanton and seconded by Mr. Shannon. Calling the roll, Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Shannon.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Ms. Scout.
Yes,
Bob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the application is approved. Attorney Mead, Mr. Saba, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now moving on to our final public hearing this evening. This is the matter of Tucker and Haley McCarthy, the owners of the property as managers of Overlook Holdings LLC, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa LLC. The property address, of course, is 31 Overlook Street in Newburyport, and of course, we all recognize that is Plum Island. The applicant seeks a special permit for nonconformities and all necessary permits and approvals to demolish the existing 1.5-story single-family structure and reconstruct a 2-story single-family structure of a reduced footprint in the same location on the site. With that, may we hear from the applicant, Attorney Taylor?
Sure.
I see we have also Mr. Herbert, our architect, and McCarthy's are here as well.
Good evening. As you mentioned, I'm Ben Taylor. I'm an attorney at Mead, Tellerman and Costa, 30 Green Street, Newburyport, for your records. With me this evening is Tucker McCarthy. Haley McCarthy is also in attendance virtually. They have a young child, so one of them stayed home with their kitten. Well as Michael Hebert, the designer on this project. And with that, let me just begin by saying, I remember when Tucker first called me about doing permitting in Newburyport, my first thought was, I sure hope this isn't on Plum Island. And my second thought was, when I found out it was on Plum Island, You can see the FAR, and hopefully that's not too big of an FAR jump, but we're here tonight asking for a special permit that does involve an increase in the FAR. Since that initial phone call, we've had a number of conversations where both the applicant and their designer have put a lot of thought into coming up with an application that, is beneficial to the neighborhood and something that we feel is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD. So with that, I'll go to the next slide, please. So talk about the existing conditions first. The structure is in the R3 and PIOD itself. It's a single family structure built in and around 1945, according to the assessor records, which being over 75 years old, and an entire demolition proposed. This did go to the historical commission. They found it was not historically significant for reasons you'll probably see in a few moments. The building permit records indicate that the building permit was issued in March 2022, about a year ago, to the prior owners to perform pretty extensive work to the structure, which included re-siding it, replacing all of the windows, as well as some significant internal renovations. However, as again, you'll see in a few moments with the existing photos, this work was not finished. So it's really sat there without siding on it, exposed to the elements for almost over a year now. Currently, it is assessed as having 4 bedrooms on the assessor card. And there's a lot of existing nonconformities. Main one is being lot area, so 12,000 square feet are required, where this lot is an undersized lot even for Plum Island standards at 4,406 square feet. You may recall that a lot of lots that you see here are at 4,900 square feet, which is the standard lot conveyed out by the Plum Island Company originally. The frontage, it has 80 feet where 120 feet are required. The front yard setbacks at 9.1 feet where 20 feet are required. The right side yard setback is 10.6 feet where 20 feet are required. And the rear yard setback is at 13.4 feet where 20 feet are required as well. It's conforming currently with all the dimensional requirements. I do want to make a point. It's a tenth off being non-conforming for lot coverage at 19.9. The FAR is currently at 23.9, 25 maximum. And also to break down those numbers, so we have them, in mind moving forward. So 23.9% of a 4,406 square foot lot equals 1,053 square feet of living area. And if we were to say, okay, what does 25% FAR look like? That is 1,101.5 square feet of living area. So that's a 48.5 square foot jump between where we are now and to get up to 25. So go to the next slide, please. Again, so as I mentioned, the structure is in the existing structures, not in great physical shape. This is the front elevation along Overlook Street. As you can see, there's no siding. The windows are in very rough shape. We go to the next slide, please. So this is the left side. This is actually a slightly earlier photo than the ones taken. This is actually from the building permit records. That's when the wire was still above, as opposed to now it's on the ground. But as you can see, the windows and the siding are still not there. Can we go to the next slide? As you can see, more of the black is off there. Again, just the angle. Next slide, please. This is going to the rear. At one point, we believe that porch was screened in or fully enclosed. And you can start to see the sauna tubes on the bottom that are not exactly upright. They tend to be leaning. Next slide, please. This is a face-on view of the rear elevation. Next slide, please. And this is the right side, so you can see all around, windows, lack of siding. This is not in good shape. Next slide, please. So now to look under the house. Again, you can see the sauna tube there, the wooden block sitting on top of it. You can see the utilities that have been exposed and have some water damage I've been informed of sitting on the cinder blocks. You can see some wires that are exposed. Next slide, please. Again, this is going a little bit deeper underneath. This is kind of the same angle, but more of the same. Next slide. Again, you can see he's sitting on sand, so as the blocks on the sauna tube. Next slide, please. Again, you see some exposed installations, some exposed utilities. Next slide. This is looking back out towards the rear. Next slide. This is the last of the existing photos, but again, you can see the sonotube is starting to lean in that photo as well as the exposed wires. Go to the next slide, please. And also before I go into the proposal, I do want to add just some points that were on the letter. The applicants and their designer did a pretty thorough analysis of the structure, both external and internal. So, as you can see, the sheathing has been exposed to the elements without any waterproof covering for so long that would need to be removed and replaced. Most of the interior walls have been stripped to the studs. Some rough electrical work that performs has been undertaken, but not fully completed. All the interior plumbing and fixtures have been removed and need to be replaced. Obviously, you saw the condition of the windows. The majority of the house needs new flooring. The existing floor joists are undersized by today's standards and would need additional reinforcement to be up to code. The existing wall studs are 2x4 construction, where today's code calls for 2x6. Again, the footings, as you saw, are undersized for this type of structure, and many of them are leaning or starting to fall over. And as you saw, the mechanical systems are very low to the ground and have had water intrusion and will need to be replaced. So with that, the proposed application is to remove the existing structure and construct a new two-story structure. The new structure actually has a unique approach here. It's a smaller footprint than the existing structure. It's smaller by about 110 square feet. They do propose to reduce the number of bedrooms from 4 to 3. Again, you can start to see the effects of the smaller footprint here, where the right side nonconformity is improved by 10.6 feet to 11.7 feet. The rear yard nonconformity is also improved 3 feet from 13.4 feet to 16.4 feet. Lot coverage, we do see a pretty strong improvement going right from 19.9 right up against the 20% to 17.2. Open space as well is improved. So the FAR increases 4.4% to 28.3%. So doing the numbers out, this equates to a 193 square foot increase in living area from 1,053 square feet to 1,246 square feet. Go to the next slide, please. So possibly just zoom in on the dark brown orange structure. Thanks, Caleb. So looking at this, the brown structure, or the brown is the proposed footprint, and the, I guess, white along the outside counts for the existing structure. So you can see the strip on the right side, obviously that's where it narrows. As well as the back, there is that white strip above the shaded, which counts for the covered porch. I know the site plan has the proposed structure and shaded, but actually the covered porch here, because if it is covered, does count towards the or as part of the building. So that white strip above also does count. The other point I'd like to make, there's no other structures on this property. So, if there was an option to remove an outbuilding or something like that, this applicant doesn't have that to try to improve its FAR calculation as well as the other density calculations. With that, can we go to the next slide, please? So these are the proposed, existing and proposed elevations. I'll turn it over to Michael Hebert, the designer, in a few moments. Obviously, we have the existing on top of the proposed for each of the 4 elevations here. That's all I've right now.
Yeah, so you can see this drawing here illustrates the proposed aesthetic in comparison to the existing building. And the being under the 35-foot building height in both cases. So we do have some photos later on that show, the proposed aesthetic as it relates to other new contemporary buildings that were constructed more recently than the 1940s and 50s style building. Next page, please. So, having a relatively small lot, obviously the goal here was to produce the smallest footprint that we could. In doing that, we had to sacrifice some luxuries and focus on efficiencies to be able to provide the client, the McCarthy family, the 3 bedrooms and 2.5 baths that they're looking to get out of this property. Next slide.
All right, yeah, so before we get into the application of the criteria, another point I'd like to make is that the relief requested here is a special permit, not a variance. Understand that's unusual here to go from something that's conforming with regards to the FAR to something that's now above the maximum allowed. However, according to the PIOD, we have it there, the alteration, reconstruction, extension, or change of lot coverage, floor area ratio, height, open space, or any of the setback requirements may be allowed upon the grant of a special permit by the ZBA and shall not require a variance. So again, I was surprised as well to see that at first, but again, here we are tonight, and that's the standard to be applied. Again, as you know, the determination is that such change would be substantially more detrimental than the existing structure to the neighborhood or PIOD. Go to the next slide, please. And so with that in mind, there are a number of improvements with this project causes to the neighborhood and generally. As I mentioned, it improves the side yard or the right side yard and the rear yard nonconformities. I'd also like to mention that the PIOD itself does have a specific limitation with side yard setback that it can't be increased to 10 feet or less. So this actually takes it away from 10 feet and diminishes it. Reduces the number of bedrooms from 4 to 3 feet. The footprint of the structure, as I mentioned before, is reduced by 110 square feet. Again, the applicant and their designer have considered refinishing and rehabbing the existing structure, but they found that that's not feasible to actually have to take the existing structure and take it off the existing pilings, put on new pilings, then do all the rehabilitation work. Logistically, it just doesn't make sense to them. Again, we're replacing a dilapidated or blighted structure that's uninhabitable currently and not built to modern codes, not built to FEMA standards, not built with flooding in mind. Replacing that with a new structure that is going to be built to all those codes, that is specifically designed to be more storm resilient, like flooding into mind, which are big goals of the PIOD itself. As I mentioned, to go back to the numbers, the 4.4 FAR increase on this small of a lot is a mere 193 square feet. It's smaller than the room that we're in right now. And again, just as intensification of use is mentioned in the PIOD, this is going to remain a single family use, which is a use by right. So there's no intensification there. Next slide, please. So now to look at the nearby neighborhood, this is the mind map with the satellite imagery. So our property is in the yellow shape there, and you can see the other structures around, many of which do appear to be bigger structures than what's proposed. Also keep in mind that the footprint is getting smaller than what's shown in these. I can go to the next slide, please. So I thought this view was more helpful just in terms of helping to see the footprint sizes. Again, comparing what's proposed with the surrounding neighborhood, still seems to be in keeping in terms of overall size. Next slide. So as you guys probably know, Overlook Street actually has two parts. This is the back part further down Plum Island. If you go down Northern Boulevard and hit 76th Street, that'll be on your left. This is what you see when you turn down 76th Street. So this is the left side of the road. Again, it's a smaller cottage on the white structure, but a larger structure that's undergone some work with the gray structure. So a little bit further down, there's a street on the right off of 76th Street called Barker Street. On the corner, there's this larger structure. Next slide. So then once you hit Overlook and you look back down and see where you came from, you can again see these structures that we pointed out in the two previous slides. The next slide. So then finally, looking down Overlook, it's a very narrow street, obviously. You can see our structure kind of in the background. It's behind the structure on the right. Next slide. This is a little bit further down. Again, our structure is on the right. You can see Overlook cuts off there. There's another Overlook that's at one point it's probably a bigger street, but it's not connected right now. Next slide. So this is turning around and looking back down Overlook. Again, there's our structure. There's the abutting structure. Next slide. This is the abutting structure. Just on this slide, I want to point out there is, in terms of neighborhood density and houses on Plum Island being on top of each other, there is a backyard to this house. So it's the structure, while it is going up a little bit, it's not gonna be right on top of its closest abutting structure. Next slide. And again, this is just the front view of that abutting structure. Next slide, please. So this is looking out across the street on Overlook. And next slide. This is actually that same structure, but because of the trees, you couldn't see it that well. So next slide. So once you go around Overlook, you take a left onto Basin Street. There's a number of larger structures on Basin Street, so this is starting to point out the line of those structures. Next slide, please. So again, you see there's a couple of actually 3-story structures on the left on Basin Street, and as well as some large structures on the right. Turn down the structures on the left, those are in and around the backyard of our property here. So again, we feel that those, get a feel for the overall neighborhood, not just on Overlook Street, but, both Basin Street and 76th Street as well. Next slide. Yeah, so here you can see those structures on the left a little bit better. As I mentioned, the 3-story structures, a lot more density than what's proposed on our property. Next slide. This is down a little bit further on 21 Basin, just sort of the line of the immediate neighborhood. You can see again, a larger structure that did undergo recent additions on top of it, as you can see. And I think that's all. I had a couple of other images just to show comparative architecture, but I think I'm gonna just end it there and say, we appreciate all the considerations of the board and ask that you find that the proposal for you tonight is not potentially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Attorney Taylor, and Mr. Bickford for the presentation. We'll go now to public comment, and we'll just put the slide up quickly, and anyone in the room who wishes to speak in connection with this application, just show of hands. Anyone? Seeing no hands going online. Anyone who wishes to speak, we'll begin with Jordan Brown. Jordan, if you can hear me, I'll just ask you to kindly unmute your mic and just give your name and address, though we've just said it out loud, but your name and address to our note taker for the record, and let us know what your thoughts are.
Hi there.
Jordan, we can hear you. If you could just, if you could turn your speaker
Hi.
on your computer.
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
All right. Hi, I'm just a next door neighbor. And I just wanted to speak my thoughts and say that I do believe it'll be detrimental. The neighborhood is going to really be changed by that. We think it's it's going to just be overshadowing. It's going to look ridiculous. It's the only house that would be on stilts in the whole area, and it just appears that you guys are comparing it to a couple big houses that are starting to go up lately, when that's just going to be the new norm. If we continue to keep building these big monstrosities, of course, then we can start comparing it to the couple that come up in the neighborhood, but it's not the norm based on those pictures. It may look like it, but we're very unhappy with that. I just wanted to call in and say that we have a lot of the neighborhood that's not very happy about it.
Okay, very good. Let's see, we'll go to Alexis Clough.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Alexis Clough. I live at 32 Basin Street, and I am abutting this property, and I do oppose it on a couple of bases for our neighborhood. I think it changes the characteristic of the neighbor significantly. Like a previous neighbor shared, Jordan, you were comparing it to a lot of properties that weren't actually up against it. So the properties actually close and actually next to it are not those big monstrosities, as you would like to call them. But the concern is too, one, especially with the proposed plan with the decks and the roof deck, is privacy. So I think it's not only going to change significantly the characteristic of the neighborhood, because you're putting a huge, you're increasing the height almost double. And on top of that, I believe you're counting the porch area as part of the square footage, when in actuality, I mean, that was a porch. So there's a few things there. I think you're increasing the height significantly, which is going to shadow our properties and is also going to infringe on our privacy, and the size of it significantly changes the characteristics of the neighborhood. So those are the three biggest concerns. So I think it is a detriment to like my property value and my privacy. In addition to concerns about if they do have those decks in there and at that height, looking into my backyard, the properties, the square footage for that lot is very small. I don't think the picture actually did it justice. I don't know the square footage of mine off of it, but essentially you're asking to go up when you're already very much non-conforming to the required square footage of the lot. So it seems that it's really unfair to the properties next to it. Again, like I said, it will increase shadowing. It'll look in my neighbor's window or into their bedroom. And if you end up renting it, it becomes renters. I mean, we have a neighborhood. I raised my daughter here. We live here full time. We're concerned about short-term rentals and the noise that would be generated from those decks. So I would like to put in the deed too, if it gets approved in any way, that they make sure that it's restricted from doing short-term rentals.
Very good. Thank you for your comments. Going further along the online hands that are raised, I see looks like Haley Pratt. Haley, if you can hear us, we can unmute your mic. You have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Hi, I don't have anything additional to add other than what was already said by Alexis and Jordan. Just feeling like it definitely feels a bit intrusive to the neighborhood. It's significantly taller than the houses that we have here, and they're all kind of on top of each other in each other's backyards. Definitely the short-term rental is concerning because of the space on the roof deck and the additional deck. Worried about what kind of people that's going to attract and how that's going to impact our neighborhood.
Ms. Pratt, can I just ask you to kindly provide your address for our note taker?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's 36 Basin Street.
Great, thank you. Was there anything further you wanted to add before we moved on?
No, just that we're in a budding neighbor.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other online hands? Anyone else wish to be heard online? I see no additional new hands. Going once, going twice. I will go ahead and close the public comment section of the public hearing, and we will now go into questions from the board. I will begin with Mr. Swan.
I'd like to go to the elevations. The elevation page, and could you just roll up the bottom right corner there, before and after of the front view, and the bottom right, the front view, bottom right. Let me make sure I understand what's happening here. Okay, now I went up there the other day. Weather's getting nice down there. It's already come up. I was surprised to see the electric cable lying on the ground, but now I understand. I can understand why you want to go up, because from the height there, you can look right down into the basin. I get it. But I just want to make sure I understand what just came up on the phone here. This whole thing above the red line on top, that's a full wall-to-wall roof deck? Is that what that is?
Yes, correct.
And the other thing, this picture, we kind of looked at it much smaller earlier because we saw all of them at once. When we just look at this little house on top and the house on the bottom, the scale of it is much bigger. It's on stilts. It's 2 stories. The stories seem kind of tall. I can't quite, actually, I have it here in front of me here, but the first floor ceiling is 9 foot and the second one's 10. So that really gets up there. I heard a lot of the neighbors concerned about the height, so I'm just making sure I can read it from here. It's 16. Right now, the mean elevation is 16, but it's, I know that's gonna be calculated as a city, but it kind of goes through the roof. Whereas now it's, like, you know, where the deck starts, and that's at, what is that number, 29? 29. Okay, so I think this kind of, to me, vividly brings to life some of the comments I've heard from some of the neighbors. When I walked around the neighborhood, I did notice that the neighbors are nowhere near this tall. The other thing I want to get to is the FAR. You're right that it's, you know, it's not a, we can essentially waive that here. You know, if you were on the mainland, this would be a new non-conformity, you pick the wrong one, down you go. Because you've gone over that, but here we can let you go over it. And I think that's kind of good. I mean, we had a proposal a couple of years ago where somebody had a house on Plum Island and the father or grandfather was getting on and he couldn't make it in and he needed to have a wheelchair entrance and they needed to put a vestibule on the front and flipped it over. That I understand, but when you take a house down completely and then build it back this tall with 3 bedrooms and 2.5 baths to go over the FAR, my question is, do you not consider a plan that would fit the that?
Plan that would fit FAR or?
Yes, the 0.25, yes.
I believe it was just, you know, logistically, there's not very much living area right now, so we wanted to try to accommodate a few more things than what are currently there. And also just one point to the height. Granted, I know 2 stories is going up, but if anyone rebuilds this, just because of the FEMA standards, it is going to have to go on stilts. So it's gonna, granted, I know you mentioned 29 feet is high. I get that, and we hear the neighbors as well. But this is gonna have to go up at least some extent to go on higher stilts. That's just the regulations and requirements that, you know, we're working within.
Caitlin, could you just slide up the page to the end elevation, left elevation there, right up above there. Either before and after. So this roof deck up on top, it covers kind of, well, I guess it's pretty obvious there, it covers what it covers up top. And then there's another deck on the first floor here, kind of what we're looking down in the basin. Is that kind of what I'm looking at?
Correct, yeah.
So this entire house has a deck on it, whether it's on the first floor or on the top floor. I would ask you about short-term rental units, but I don't think that's really in our purview. So if some of you are out there, who've asked the question, wondering why we're not asking it, unless you want to talk to it.
I'm sorry, talk to.
Well, a lot of the abutters are concerned about this becoming, you know, a big roof deck up there, you know, a lot of short-term rentals and party house and whatnot.
Yeah.
You want to talk to it?
Well, I mean, the proposed use is single family use. I know in your report has consistently had talked about short-term rental controls, which is kind of beyond our purview tonight, but. As far as the roof decks, you know, we've had other applications on Plum Island specifically where people do try to, you know, expand their decks, do propose roof decks, you know, because they can't per se increase their living area so much, but also try to use what they have. So that's really the intent and effort behind both the second story deck and the roof deck here.
Okay, I have no other questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Chan.
I did struggle, but I think I figured it out how you can get up to that roof deck. I saw the stairway, but I couldn't find the door. Finally found the doorway. I guess my biggest concern was the fire and how tall it is. I understand it's within the regulations, but it's a full 12 feet above the peak of the existing roof. So I do, my biggest concern there is it is going to stick up. It's going to, in that little tiny, quaint little neighborhood of tiny homes, it's going to look like a tower to some degree. I'm not as concerned about the roof decks and the decks just because there are a lot of them out on Plum. They're all over the place. So my concern was the size and the scale, size and massing, and the FAR. I understand it's a modest home, it's not that big, but it's punched through the 25% FAR that you know, if it was at 25%, might be a little bit more palatable. So I've got no questions. I suppose I deliberated. My apologies. I've got no other questions.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bennett.
Yeah, it's Caleb. Tell me again what the height limitation is on this line.
The zoning requirement?
Yeah.
So it's a maximum of 35 feet.
And the structures on it.
29 proposed. The existing is 16.1 feet.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Ms. Scow.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One of the abutters mentioned in the comments that they thought that the FAR calculation for what it is now was including what is the current deck. Is that correct? That the 23.8% includes the current deck space?
No, so the way FAR is defined in the ordinance, it's living area and decks, outdoor porches that, you know, that aren't covered in part of the house do not count towards FAR.
Okay, so that's not included. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I guess my second question is, what's the history just for the last year of this property? In that somebody started a renovation that they had a permit for that was a lot smaller in scale, and now, you know, we're looking at sort of plans that are put forward because it's basically has to be demolished. I'm just curious as to if you have any, if you can tell us what sort of happened to the property in the last year.
Yeah, I don't know too much other than what's on the, you know, building permit records with the city. So that was the prior owner, not the current applicant. I do, you know, was able to pull the building permit and see what was proposed. You know, however, you know, I don't know the full story. I mean, you know, things happen with, you know, various developments. So unfortunately, I don't have that full story.
But the current owners have no relationship to the prior owners.
No.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
All right, Ms. Peckney.
Okay, so 29, and is the railing on the rooftop 6 feet?
3.5,
3.5.
42 inches.
Okay. And then a new roof was installed in March 22?
I don't believe so. It does, I know the roof looks like it's doing better than the rest of the house.
Part of the house.
And you could satisfy FEMA requirements by being on stilts and keeping to a single story?
Potentially.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't think I have any additional questions that haven't already been addressed, so I'll close that portion of the public hearing unless there's any other questions from the board. Being none, we'll now go into deliberations, and again, not to reiterate the 9B2 criteria.
Mr. Chair, excuse me, sorry to interrupt. We don't just ask for a continuance at this time.
Okay.
To your May 9th meeting.
May 9th. Let's see. Caitlin, what do we, what's May 9th look like? I can probably just see that online, can't we?
One thing there so far, and then something else was just continued.
Right.
That's still.
Okay.
I speak 1699.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So we have 2 on there. Right.
Okay, that's fine. May 9th. Yes, very good. So we have the applicant request to continue to May 9th. We have a motion from the board and a second.
So,
Great. Motion is made by Mr. Stenick.
I'll
and
second it.
Seconded by Mr. Swanton. All those in favor of the motion to continue this application to the hearing of May 9th, Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Mr. Bennett,
yes,
Ms. Scott.
Yes,
Yeah.
And Rob Champagne, I vote yes, it's the affirmative, the ayes have it, motion carries and the application is continued. We'll see you on May 9th. And thank you for the presentation thus far. To those that had commented during public comment, thank you for your time. This matter will be continued and we will take it up again at the hearing on May 9th. So if it's in the card, please, if you wish to speak further, we certainly encourage you to make yourselves available. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, that concludes the public hearings and the business of the ZBA this evening. We will now close public hearings and open our business meeting. We have the minutes from Ms. Gretchen Joy, 3/28/23. Any changes, proposed alterations? Any revisions? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of 3/28?
So moved.
I second.
Motion's made by Mr. Swanton, seconded by Mr. Shannon, and thirded by Ms. Scout. So
I was too
all those-
slow.
all those in favor of the approval of the minutes, say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Any ayes or no votes? None. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Thank you. The next is, we have, as everyone I think knows, we have the STRU discussion that is preambled for us in the staff report, and we also have a little bit of a synopsis from the report that is part of our agenda. The long and the short, as we all well know, there is a zoning amendment that's proposed. We have Councilor Said, first, our Ward 1 City Councilors, sponsorship of a new and latest adaptation with at least co-sponsor support that has made it further than any proposed zoning amendment has made it in the past on STRU. It still has to meet with full and final muster by advisory opinions, and then council will be taking it up I believe they'll be taking it up in debate and discussion on April 19th. Thank you. So this is really our opportunity to review it, since we would be the permit granting authority. The licensing piece would go through licensing, but the special permit piece would fall with us. And that means that it would finally have recognized labeling and legitimacy under our zoning matrix as a hybrid commercial / residential use. Right now, there's nothing that defines it. This amendment would seek to create a drawer for that file, so to speak. So, really, it's about us reviewing what is proposed, understanding what we would be responsible to undertake in the workload, but also the subject matter of what we would be deciding on these applications. I think it's fair to say, based on the number of identified SDRUs within the city, based on the Massachusetts DOR registry, we have a fair understanding of all of those that are complying with the DOR self-tax, or I should say taxation law. So there's a fair calculus of the number that exists. And I think it's 200 and something, 200. It's 260.
There are less that I think they're registered with the state, but that's sort of the
Right.
number that we might see here, including those that are not.
Right,
registered with the
and
state.
there are many that, there are presumably many, or at least some that aren't. And there are many platforms that host them, from the prototypical, big ones like VRBO, Verbo, Airbnb, Home Away, Vacasa, and then the smaller, more localized ones that we all probably know of, or if you don't, they're there. So there's a lot to sort of kick around here. So we are usually not in this position. We usually defer this sort of policy piece, and I think Andy mentioned this, to the planning board and or the council. And it is, something we've stepped back and just simply done our job within our defined, our defined role as an appeals board. But here we're gonna have, we have a little bit of policy input, and council wants to hear from us. It's ultimately gonna rest with us, so maybe we kick it around. Anyone have any thoughts or want to talk about this in advance? But yeah,
Yeah, I think we should have an opinion on this, that they're having a joint meeting of the planning board hearing on the 19th with, I believe it's the committee of the city council, right, or is it the full city?
It's the planning development committee of the city council.
Planning development committee of the city council and the planning board are having a hearing. Many moons ago, in another municipality, I was on the planning board for many years and had to develop zoning ordinances. And, part of the process is, at some point, you have a hearing and you get input. And since this ordinance directly affects us, I think we should at least discuss whether we want to provide some input. And I have one particular thing that bugs me, which is, if you look up on that chart on R3, you'll read down below here, it says SP, Investor Short-Term Rental Unit, SP. And the two next to it, two business zones, SP, SP3 next to it. That's us. It's identified down below, but special permits, those would come here to us. And what I worry about is there is very little in this thing that says what the criteria is for us to make a decision here. So they're kind of, I talked to Andy about this because I was confused, and my understanding is when they don't specify the criteria, we fall back on our normal criteria, our prongs, if you will. Is this thing substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood than what's currently there? And I can just imagine what's going to happen. We're going to get a butter who comes in and says, okay, there's a house next to me. And it's a, 2-family house, and they're about to put 6 of these things in there, and that's substantially more detrimental. And I have a hard time understanding how they wouldn't all be. I mean, all the abutters are going to complain that they're substantially more detrimental. And they're not putting any language in here for us, so we just have to fall back on, is it substantially more detrimental? And I think we should point out to them that I think the path we're headed down here, we're gonna be put in a tough spot we only had one of these come up a couple months ago, I guess it was somewhere in the south end, you may recall, some of the abutters objected to one that was there. Of course, these are not, they're not entirely, the legal status is up in the air, so somehow it came to us. But the neighbors were concerned, and I could certainly see this happening on these. And it looks like a nice bylaw, they're trying to develop something, but I don't see how, without any criteria for us, we don't get into this pickle where if one of us or 5 of us say this is more detrimental, how do we argue it isn't? If you take a 1-family house and turn it into, it's got 4 bedrooms, you could have 4 of these short-term rental units there. And
If it was one house.
Even though it's one house.
Turned into weekly rentals or monthly rentals.
There is some, not to interrupt, but just to sort of guide our conversation a little bit, or to offer some guidance, not to presume to guide, but to offer guidance. There is some defining criteria that will be given to us. There is a calculus to be added to our quote unquote prongs, right? And they include things like parking. And they include things like owner occupancy and on-site occupancy versus, investor related. And so we will have the unenviable task of, in addition to our 2 prototypical special permit prongs, which is governed by 40A, not so much, and thereby trickles through our zoning ordinance. We will also have, by virtue of this amendment, additional criteria to sort of build our lens.
But if I just to respond to that, you mentioned owner occupied and you mentioned parking. The SPs are only in the investor short-term rental units. We don't get involved in the owner occupied ones.
Yeah.
That's not us.
Those are all permit or not.
That's
Those are all-
The license or not.
And then parking is a big deal, but that's been really watered down. If you go to the parkings, there's a parking section of this memo. And you don't need parking for many of these units. So we're not gonna be able to say, oh, they don't have parking. Somewhere down here, there's parking table.
Well, isn't that the policy? It kind of, there's an animus against investor owned, and it's placing a higher burden on them. And that's what
But the higher burden is simply to prove that it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I agree with Ken. I think that, sorry, Mr. Swanton. I looked at this and there's no standard in here for the ZBA to make a determination for a special permit. And it is only with respect to investor short-term rentals that a special permit can be awarded in a few of these districts. And so my question was exactly, I guess, what he's saying is what standard do we fall back on? Do we fall back on the typical standard that we use in a lot of these other special permit, or not? Like, I guess I don't know the law well enough to find out if that's where we're thrown into. I'm sure someone will spell it out at some point when they come in for a permit, but I think that having a little more guidance as to what is the criteria for granting the permit would be very helpful.
I was assuming it would be very similar to the criteria for an in-law. right? And it doesn't impair the integrity or character of the district, doesn't cause a detrimental excess of use to answer if there are 4 or 20 in that. Traffic and pedestrian safety, I mean, we had an in-law renewal, was it a month ago on 10th Street? That took 10 seconds. It doesn't seem as complicated to me. Again, I'm just decided to be odd man out, so to speak,
But
tonight, so.
I think those are much simpler, aren't they? And in law, they have to be related.
And well,
Right, but I'm saying that
Rental's
I
gonna
was
be
assuming the
job.
criteria would be something like the in-law criteria.
you know, before we, I should have remembered to do this at the outset. I did it last time when we opened this. I just want to continue to disclose for the record, my wife and I, own 2 cottages on Plum Island that we operate for part of the year as short-term rentals. I have, as I mentioned last meeting, reached out to the Ethics Commission, and I'm seeking an advisory opinion on to what extent, if at all, I can participate in future deliberations and possibly even participate as the permit granting authority. I'm waiting, for that to come back, and I'll share it as soon as I do. But I just want to make sure I restate that for to refresh. But having said that, to Patricia's point, I think this was also Ken's point. Am I hearing, and tell me your thoughts on this, would we have some buy-in from any of us or all of us to invite the committee, the council, subcommittee, and the planning board to invite them to participate in this next.
We get to go.
Well, we get to go, but it's, do we want to be part of that process?
I'm proposing that we provide an opinion. I'd rather do it as a board rather than as an individual.
I agree. So you mean versus just show up and raise your hand and say, hello, I'm.
We could send a letter in advance, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, but do we want to be, if we could do that, but then I think we miss out on the sort of the organic piece of it.
Well, I think you would go there too.
Okay.
And I just want to address this next point. If it was like in-law, where there's a list of like 8 criteria, the blood relative, there's like Steve things. There's just, I see parking, but it's pretty minimal. And there's nothing else.
Space for 3 bedrooms.
I wasn't assuming that was the final
That's it.
set of criteria that will ever exist. I
That's
thought
it.
this was in.
No, this is the proposed zoning bylaw.
I think if we say nothing,
That's what we get.
we're gonna get that.
And the first one that comes in and all the neighbors complain. The other point I want to make is because Andy pointed this out to me today. If let's say the first one we get, there's 30 neighbors and they all complain. And we say, okay, I guess it is worth it. Look, everybody is up on ours. And we go to the next one. Let's say nobody shows up for that one. Have we set a precedent or what do we do here?
We don't set a precedent by voting, so that part of it we don't have to worry too much about. We're a board of appeals, so everything we do is de novo. It's all, first instance, but
Andy,
your
if you
point.
chime in, Andy, because Andy, I think you explained this better than I did.
Right. I can understand it because I've been seeing 2 years or plus, council discussions on this and inputs from others. I think, Ken raises a valid point, which is that here you have basically the typical special permit criteria would be invoked, right? I think maybe what you're getting at is the fact that there are some basic requirements that are needed to qualify for the use, period. But those aren't necessarily qualitative. Those are just, do you check a box or not, right? And so your point is beyond those checking the boxes, do they have the minimum number of parking spaces required and so forth? What are the qualitative evaluations the board can do? Here you're looking back to the standard special permit criteria that are called out in the ordinance that we typically talk about. And maybe to your point, the things that I would sort of anticipate are the sharp difference maybe between, a strong or better opposition to one application that each, as the chair mentions, you're not necessarily, legally, we may not be seeing ourselves in a truly, precedent setting situation. We can have this debate in court, but it does create, I think, a potentially awkward situation if you have 2 applications that are largely or almost identical for every other, situation or instance involved in the application. But the only difference is that there's strong or better opposition in one instance and not in another. It's a little harder for the board to determine, whether that's, detrimental or not. You have to make a judgment call yourselves. But that seems to be something that's likely to come up because this is a quasi commercial use and essentially in a residential district in some cases. And so you're likely to see that sort of tension there in one way or form or another. The council is obviously looking to balance, the interest and the concerns that are involved here, but that is something that I can see being a potential issue for you as a board, is that you're going to have, these same criteria every time. The other thing is, setting a limit on the cap. Patricia had mentioned, an increase of, too many, a detrimental excess of that particular use in, say, a district. I do think there's the ability, I've talked about with councils and others, about the ability to have through the licensing process a cap on the number of the city, if that's a concern, meaning the total number of the community.
You mean like a quota?
Well,
I don't think that's gonna ever survive like constitutional muster. I mean, I think we can't, so what is that number 7? Is it 27? Is it 127? Like, I feel like that's definitely, I get it. I've been hearing those things too, but I not to interrupt you, but
Sure.
I feel like that would be the worst thing in the world. We could try, like the council would try to impose on us. It's an
Well, I'm sorry,
arbitrary
my
number.
point with that is just that there are different tools to use that,
Yeah,
and again, it's up to ultimately speaking, the council, and it's got to have input from all these different parties, right, now, all the stakeholders. My point is just that there are different tools, and that doing a special permit process to limit the numbers that are sort of expanding in the residential districts by special permit, it may actually be, in some ways, you have to evaluate which tool is doing which thing, but I'm not necessarily convinced the council would be precluded by putting a cap. Maybe the island's a separate category, because we've talked a lot about that being a
Yeah.
separate category, but perhaps on the mainland, maybe there's some sort of a cap, if the council wishes to impose one that could control the proliferation of these, separate from, say, which districts they're allowed, so just the overall total per se, if that is a concern.
Let me ask, is any members of this, and thank you, anyone concerned about or have any, trouble with the idea that one application will elicit more interest and likely not necessarily positive interest as being a disbalance? Or do you see it as being reflective of ferreting out, problematic operators, which is part of the spirit of this ordinance, is to identify, those that create disruption and disbalance and disharmony in a residential zone. We're all very familiar with that. So is that okay? Is that fair game that we'll hear from those neighbors that, who will finally have this voice to say, hey, this has not been going well because these operators of this short-term rental unit are not here, do not respond, do not seem to care, et cetera, et cetera, just to use that as a hypothetical. And is that fair game? Is that part of the moving parts of an ordinance such as this?
Well, what can I comment a little bit on this?
Yeah, please, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No. I guess there is a question, and Ken is right about what metrics do we use to measure the special permit. There are a couple of ways of doing that. Having a list of specific metrics that must be met. I don't know what they would be. I don't know if we could develop such a list. That's one way to go. The other one is the way we work now. Let's be honest, it is a subjective test, substantially more detrimental.
Case by case.
Case by case, we are driven by everything and anything that is presented to us. My view is that I like some flexibility in the decision-making process. And to your point, Rob, I think there will be different responses from the neighborhoods. There will be to different applicants, to the various factors around it, the length, the size, all of those factors, which would be wonderful to roll into a piece of legislation. But as we know, that hardly ever happens. And in the world of administrative law, which is what we are, there is the administrative agency, the zoning board, has vast discretion. And how it will shake out, I don't know. The way we react may cause a major amendment to this statute, but I don't know how we can give the city council more direction in terms of what criteria. And if we can, I'm all for that, but I can't think of that.
I'm not proposing we give them direction as to what criteria. When they gave us the in-law apartment bylaw, they had a bunch of criteria, they developed it. And then we can use our discretion to figure out whether it meets it. In this case, they've chosen not to, almost none, just that little parking thing.
Well, no, we have a zoning ordinance.
Yeah, so we have to fall back, and is it substantially more detrimental?
Right, I'm not saying that.
It's not in there, right?
No, it is in the zoning ordinance, so it will be, it will be.
You don't see an issue, you don't see a problem down the road of having that be the only criteria, all these abutters come in.
I don't
the
know.
only criteria.
I don't know, I honestly don't know, I don't know how it's going to play out.
I mean, think about it, if one went in
No,
next
I know
to you,
people are gonna
if
complain,
anyone went in next to you,
yeah,
and you took a two-family house and put 4 units in there, don't you think it'd be more detrimental to the neighborhood?
you know.
I'm not
You
sure
can
I
say-
could find one not detrimental.
Yeah, that's my point.
Or not, or
That's my
or someone would find it detrimental a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I mean, just like we don't, when we hear those matters now, just because there's a neighborhood objection, we don't necessarily surrender and say
Right.
deny.
I know that.
So, you know, we have our discretion, we have our own independent obligation to apply the underlying statute, its policies and principles, and the standard.
I just think Bud just crystallized what I was worried about.
But
I don't think I could
much
find it.
into them.
But if Bud and I both,
I got you.
understand, if both of us can't find one that's more not detrimental, we'll always get 2 no votes, nothing will ever pass.
Well, then maybe then the council will have to fix that.
I understand, but to me, I
Well,
don't have something by us in the past, it's unfair, tell them in advance.
Well, tell me how you would want to fix it.
You go to the hearing Wednesday night and you say, you know, some of us think it's gonna be tough to say yes to any of these.
But don't give them any guidance as to what the criteria should be.
No,
You would,
we're not in charge of writing the things. The criteria should be about traffic and neighborhood impact and all the other things.
well, we're the zoning board, with all due deference, we're smart as hell about those issues. I
Could
think
someone
we're-
show me where the standard is now in this zoning ordinance? Because I've read it. And I do not see anywhere where it says what the standard is measured against for granting that special permit. It has,
Well, so in the absence, if I can chime in.
sure,
In the
thank you.
in the absence of it being identified in this as an amendment, you default back to the definition as it exists in the body of the ordinance, and it's a special permit, so it's the special permit criteria, the 2-prong test.
If I could supplement that, and this goes back to the language elsewhere in the zoning ordinance, the zoning ordinance says that in granting a special permit, the special permit granting authority has to make the following findings, and that would apply here to all the special
In
permits.
addition to which, this amendment could apply additional criteria,
Right.
but it can't apply any fewer criteria than the criteria that already exists in the zoning ordinance, that the application that the proposed alteration is not substantially more detrimental, that there isn't an intensification of an existing nonconformity, right? And then anything else that the amendment identifies. And in this case, the amendment doesn't appear to identify anything else except parking, only insofar as one of these matrix criteria.
All these zones, R3, B1, B2, B3, where the special permits are possible, they all go back to that same standard for a special permit. It's nothing like where Plum Island has a different standard for a special permit, right? So these
Correct.
4 zones go back to the sort of the mainland standard that we usually are looking to.
Okay, I think the answer to your concern is that the ordinance itself should specify how many, under what circumstances, end of discussion, don't give the zoning board any authority to grant.
I'm not saying that. If you're asking to take a special permits, give us some criteria, that's all I'm saying. I agree.
Something in addition to, substantially more, not substantially.
It's not.
But what are they?
Yes, Ms. Pecknick, we're gonna give Ms. Pecknick the floor for a moment, shall we?
Comfortable concluding that we can have abutters come in and listen to some of them and not others. And say, okay, you have a special permit to add 1,800 square feet of massing forever. But we can't deal with 18 neighbors. I don't understand why this would be any different.
Saying like, this is what we signed up for.
We do.
That's what I'm saying.
I think, I agree with Ms. Pecknick on this. I think that, look, it's not gonna be easy and it's gonna be uncomfortable, and half of the room, if not more than half of the room, will be upset with us, but then's the breaks of of being a member of the ZBA, like, this is not uncommon ground for us.
I'm happy with all that.
We have to still try to
I
make the
feel
best
badly
decision.
because I see us going down a path where the first 10 of them that come in will all be turned down, and it's so avoidable. Because, the only criteria they're giving us is it's substantially more detrimental, and I'm where Bud just said. I have a hard time imagining one that's not.
Well, for example, how about shouldn't we suggest that that there be a financial demonstration of I don't know, some financial wherewithal? Maybe that's a good criteria
Wherewithal for what?
to seek a special permit if you're in those categories.
What do you mean, like, if someone can afford the process by which to come before?
Not that, but if they're in this for the business, we want to know that they have, I'm just making this up. But yeah, that's a criteria. I don't know.
And here's, what's interesting is that before it even comes to us, and I'll throw this out there, not to put a wrench in it. Ms. Blanchet will have already reviewed this as the zoning codes enforcement officer. She will already determine if the parking's there or not. By the time it comes to us, we won't have to guess as to that. We won't be deliberating that. We won't be wondering about that or toiling with that. It will already have been determined by our zoning codes enforcement officer. So part of the one real sort of additional criteria that would seem to rise to the level as being something new for us to decide, other than the 2-prong 9B2 criteria of special permit, isn't even being decided by us. It's being pre-decided, for us. By the time it gets to us, we'll already know.
We want a background check for the people who are in the business. I don't know. I'm just speculating. These are the kinds of things that.
You know what? Here's a good point.
Legitimate point.
How about this? If I can propose that, this is where, if there's anything valuable I might be able to bring as an operator, and I take great pride in how I operate, how we operate. We treat it as our, as a home, right? And we're very,
You're a commercial.
we're not an investor, although it is an investment. We're not these prototypical investor operators. We decorate it as though it's our home. We care for it. We deliberate on who we allow to be guests. And there is a review paradigm whereby operators are reviewed by guests as to responsiveness, communication, whether there was some issue with respect to as it was advertised versus as it was, in fact, whether neighbors have issues with, the guests that were there. All of these things get recorded in almost all of the larger platforms in a bilateral review paradigm. It's a 5-star paradigm, where there are 5 tenets of review, from cleanliness to responsiveness to, a few other things, and 1 through 5 stars. The guests review the hosts and the hosts review the guests. It would be important, and I've read some horrible reviews where routine guest reviews of hosts, the same sort of, the likely suspect, so to speak, in hosting can be, you can tell when someone's ex parte, when they're absentee as a host, they're in a different time zone, they're not responding, someone shows up and there's a problem. Things like that are part of what create disruption and discourse in a neighborhood. Especially, and I think part of that could be a criteria. Let's look at the review of, what do the reviews look like? Is this a host that seems to catch a lot of, bad press from neighbors or guests?
My view is that those commercial undertakings are akin to running a hotel. So, hotels are regulated. I don't know, they got to provide toilet paper, they got to do this, they got to do that, they got to do all of those things. Those could be a laundry list of criteria that we could require them. They have to certify that the place is clean. I don't know, but.
And have like fire suppression, equipment, have fire.
A first aid kit. I'm just talking off the top of my head, but for us, it's not. Those would be the kinds of questions I would ask a business, a for-profit.
But that's fair for us to ask.
Right. So, but on the other hand, Ken, are those the kinds of things that should be in the, you have to show a certificate of cleanliness from a, I don't know, a public cleaner. I don't know.
I visited this with the, remember that one, I think it was Market Street or somewhere in that neighborhood, where somebody had an old inn that they were redoing, and some of the butters were there, and they were like, we gotta put a sign on the deck that says you can't have people smoking out
Oh,
there.
yeah.
You gotta have a sign, you can't, people can't be every percent hour, all these things. I mean, when you're in a residential zone and you put a business next to it, it's nice when there are all those kinds of criteria. All I'm saying is, because there are no criteria, and we just have to fall back and is it more detrimental, I have a hard time seeing how any of them are gonna.
How any decision we
I
make,
get that point, correct.
how any decision we make will be credible and
Exactly.
have continuity from
Credible and it's
application.
not detrimental.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
then we can say, maybe we say in addition to the standard in, the overarching standard. The zoning board may consider, among other things,
Noise,
Well,
traffic, all that stuff. That's
Well,
what people are really worried about.
Well,
They're not worried about it, it's like financially.
And let's hear from Andy and then.
You want to start, I don't know, I'm just throwing it.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I just wanted to make sure, just one distinction, which is, again, we've talked a lot about the zoning here. We haven't quite gotten the licensing piece because the assumption is, the council will work out some zoning and then we'd be able to work with the licensing. But there's a distinction I think to be made there about, think of the special permit process maybe as folks are coming in, they want to establish a use or an activity, and there's a review process for that. Whereas, you might have complaints from folks, and if there's a use that's out there already and they're coming in today to sort of formalize something, right? Maybe, depending on the time of the ordinance and how it's set up, whether that's sort of after the fact or it's, formalizing something, but that may be seen as sort of criteria for review with a butter inputs, maybe of, the commercial nature of the use being considered before the use starts taking place. I have considered the licensing procedure, well, it's unfortunately something that happens a little later in the process. If there is an issue that's resulting from the operation itself or the failure of someone to operate, well within a neighborhood, a residential neighborhood, per se, then that's actually something that to me is better addressed, more timely and efficiently addressed through a licensing procedure where, yes, a license may have been granted at the outset for something that meets whatever minimum criteria the council wants to establish here, but then the license would have to be revoked. And once that license is revoked, to me, that seems like a more streamlined process of getting the shutdown and support from, with legal counsel in the courts, getting that to fall through, then trying to do it through a special permit process per se. So that's one reason why I just wanted to point out the distinction there. I think that there, for instance, the licensing board, I think would be on a better ground for revoking a license and then if there's a fall through to complete, make sure there's adherence to the shutdown of that short-term rental unit, rather than the ZBA at the outset trying to determine whether or not that use as proposed, and again, if it's not already there, if someone's proposing something, whether it will be an issue for the neighbors, right? It's easier to determine based on a track record. There is a problem where, so I just wanted to make that distinction. It's harder for this board, I think, to make that evaluation early on,
I appreciate that, Andy, as well, and Patricia, what did you?
I have a comment and a question. So my comment is, I don't assume that inevitably on every application, everyone would show up and say no. I have a friend who lives next to one of these investor-owned properties, the owners in Pennsylvania. They appreciate that it's not, people aren't there most of the year. The people are there in the summer, but they're, the house is empty, there's more on-street parking for them. I did have a question. It says for the investor on 183 days of residency required. Then it says must be physically present for any nights in excess of 120, but physically present for how long? A day? Can I come for a day and then leave for 120, then come for a day? I wasn't sure.
The way that's written, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that we could certainly, and I appreciate everybody's input, and we could bant this back, and I think it's good banter and good deliberation. I think it's important for us to, bring these thoughts and maybe even more organized set of thoughts. If it's in the cards and you're able to the subcommittee planning board hearing so that we can share them. I don't think that this is synthesized enough to put it in form of a letter, unless you feel otherwise, Ken.
You're right.
I think that it would be, a 50-page letter. It'd be more of a manifesto.
We have different opinions.
But it would be, but it is important to begin the process and begin the work of starting, with a great wide, barrel and finesse it into, a funnel. And I think that is just the hard work of this exercise. I do think that eventually we will have people before us. We will struggle with criteria. We will see all sorts of disparate examples of good, bad, and everywhere in between. And we will, I think we will struggle to make, perfect decisions in an imperfect environment, but I think that that's part of the work. That's just sort of, I think those are the flaws, the incurable flaws in this kind of work, because it's subjective. And it is case by case, and it will continue to be with each and every one of these, case by case, where we have to sit and think and hear from and sort of feel from the application and see whether if it seems to meet with whatever criteria we might have, in addition to what we know we have. Does anyone want to continue this discussion? Or is anyone or is everyone in favor of maybe suspending further sort of discussion and deliberation in favor of picking it back up when we're in the company of the kind of thinking machine of the joint committee and planning board, if you can make it?
Yeah, I don't mind not having any more discussion. I think we kind of all set our points. I do want to, I just don't think it's fair for them to develop this thing and look for input. I feel it just as one zoning board member provide the input that I don't see how
I don't disagree with you. Yeah.
I see how any improve any of these. So if there's anybody else agrees with me, like this person. If you guys are developing a file of it, you may not be happy with.
Yeah, I think that that's part of the organic nature of the process. I think that it will be whatever it is, whatever they codify, if anything, will be taken from prose and put into practice, and practice will be the proving ground of that prose. And that prose will change based on the efficacy of the practice. If it don't work, we'll know right away. And they will be hearing from us, and they will be seeing it, and residents and observers and everyone in between will be making the same observations. And I think that is almost part of the, that's the perfect part of this imperfection, is that's the process.
Right.
I don't think there's a better way to do it other than to simply do it and see how it fits. It's not, and I get it, I believe in that. I, like all of you, and I respect everyone's time, all of the time, and this is, it's uncelebrated work, right? But it takes a lot of thinking, it takes a lot of time into the evenings, and this is only going to add more time, and it's a bit uncertain. So I know that there's more of that coming our way, but I think I don't know that there isn't a perfect inoculation to what ails us right here, at least not yet. I think that it's going to be a totality of several vaccines along the way to figure out what the right, what the right cocktail is for our city and our uses. And I think that's the only way to do it, is to just jump in and start doing it.
Their only appeal will be to go to land court,
Or Superior Court.
because that's just gonna turn into a whole nother cluster of lawyers, not that lawyers are bad people.
Well, also, let's think about all the potholes that we could build with those private equities. All those
Lawyers
Gotta make a living.
Think about all that great highway work that's gonna be done with all those court private fees. I don't know. I mean, I don't disagree with you, and yeah, but I don't know of a better one. Do we have anything further before we take a motion to adjourn? All right, thank you guys all, and everyone for sticking around and participating in this. Lynn, did you have anything you wanted to add before we? seal
Nope,
it
I
up?
don't. Thank you.
All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Excellent. Motion's made, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Let's have it.
Right.
And thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Probably.